The napkin was paper, not cloth like I used to set, and it sat crumpled in my lap, stained with gravy I hadn't eaten. The room was full, louder than Grace, filled with chatter about football and cranberry sauce. My son's voice cut through it all. "Mom, you're already up. Can you top off my tea? Like a waitress?" I stood still with the pitcher in hand, then slowly sat back down. I cooked. I cleaned. I gave them my home. And now I was a waitress. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Comment below. I live in a small town in Missouri, the kind with one grocery store, one post office, and the same faces in the church pews every Sunday. Our house sat on Maple Hill Lane near the edge of town, with a white porch that needed painting and hydrangeas I never quite gave up on. I was born 2 streets over, in a house that smelled of flour and soap. Married just after I turned 19, wore a dress I made with my own hands, and moved into this very home with my husband, Harold, 52 years ago. He passed 6 winters back. Heart gave out during a nap. He always said he'd go quiet, and he did. I found him still holding the crossword. That winter, I stayed in our house alone. People brought pies, the pastor prayed, but the nights, oh, they echoed. I kept the heater on just enough so the pipes wouldn't freeze, and I left the porch light burning long after I locked the door. Hope, maybe, that someone would come visit. They didn't. It was my son Thomas, who eventually said I shouldn't be alone. He and his wife, Carrie, lived just across town with their 2 children. He said, "Mom, come stay with us, just until you feel settled." I remember standing on my porch, suitcase in hand, looking back one last time at the house I'd kept for half a century. It felt like leaving behind my skin. They cleared out the guest room, laid fresh sheets on the bed. It was kind at first. Carrie made tea, and the children called me Nana, in that sweet way that felt like honey on my chest. I offered to help. I always did. I washed dishes, folded laundry, mended socks no one asked me to, gave them my social security checks to help out with bills. Just until I found my footing. Months passed. Then years. I made myself useful. I baked every Friday, pies, biscuits, cornbread. I knew who liked what. Anna loved cinnamon, Jacob didn't like raisins. On Sundays I made roast, just like I did when Thomas was a boy. Carrie thanked me less as time went on, but I didn't mind. I was helping. That was enough. Until it wasn't. There were signs, little ones. My pie was replaced by store-bought cake at Anna's birthday. My laundry pile left untouched. My bedroom door, once knocked on, now stayed closed. The dinner table grew louder, younger. Full of talk I didn't quite follow. I was there, but not in it. Like furniture. Still I smiled. I laughed when appropriate. I listened more than I spoke. Because I believed, if I just stayed kind, stayed helpful, they'd see me. Thanksgiving was always my holiday. Since Harold and I were first married, I cooked every dish, turkey, yams with brown sugar, stuffing that took all morning. My tablecloth was embroidered with autumn leaves, and I had a gravy boat shaped like a cornucopia. Even when we didn't have much, we had Thanksgiving. This year, Carrie wanted to host. Said it was her turn. I agreed. I offered to help, and she said sure, but handed me a list. Mashed potatoes. Baked pies. Keep an eye on the rolls. No mention of the tablecloth. No gravy boat. The kitchen felt borrowed. The air was rushed. Still I stirred and chopped. I peeled and basted. My hands moved by memory. As guests arrived, cousins, neighbors, friends, I slipped into the rhythm of serving. Like I always had. I wore my rust-colored cardigan, the one Harold always said made my eyes glow. I smiled at everyone. Refilled glasses. Offered seconds. No one noticed I hadn't made myself a plate. That's when Thomas said it. "You're already up, Mom. Can you top off my tea? Like a waitress." He chuckled. Others did too. I didn't. The pitcher felt heavier than it should have. My knees shook a little. I sat. And I realized something. I wasn't a guest. Not even family, not really. I was staff. Later, when the dishes were done and the leftovers packed away, I sat alone in the living room. The laughter had moved to other rooms. I looked at the stained napkin in my lap and thought. I gave them my home, my time, my hands. And all they saw was a waitress. The day after Thanksgiving, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't yet crested the tree line behind the house, and the kitchen sat quiet in the blue-gray light of morning. I put the kettle on, not out of habit, but because I wanted to hear something boil. Something that would answer to me. Carrie's shoes were by the back door. Muddy soles pointed toward the breakfast rug I crocheted last winter. No one took them off properly anymore. I made tea. Sat at the table. No one joined me. By noon, the house was moving again. Laughter upstairs, thuds of children jumping on their beds, the clatter of Thomas heading out for shopping. Black Friday they called it. A day for gathering more, though we hadn't even finished what we had. He didn't say goodbye. Just the slam of the door. I spent most of that day cleaning the kitchen. Not because I had to, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. Every sponge stroke reminded me I wasn't really part of them anymore. Over the next few weeks, things got quieter. For me anyway. Carrie stopped asking if I wanted to join them for outings. The kids, once glued to my lap for stories, now rushed past me on their way to tablets and dance lessons. The Christmas tree went up without me. I found out when I came downstairs and it was already twinkling. My ornaments, the old ones from when Thomas was a boy, weren't there. I'd kept them in a shoebox labeled in my own handwriting. Thomas, Christmas 1982. Tiny paper angels. A handprint in salt dough. I found the box weeks later, still in the garage untouched. Dust gathered over it like snow. When I asked Carrie about it, she smiled too quickly and said, "Oh, we just went with a silver theme this year." Then she turned back to her phone. I wanted to tell her those ornaments weren't just paper and thread. They were proof that I had mattered, that I'd been someone. But I didn't say anything. I swallowed it. I always did. In small ways, my place kept shrinking. They moved my sewing kit into the laundry room for more space. My reading chair was replaced with a standing lamp and a potted plant. At dinner, my seat edged closer to the kitchen doorway. No longer between the children, but near the serving cart. One night, I overheard Carrie on the phone. She was in the hallway, didn't see me folding towels nearby. "Yeah, she's still with us," she said, half laughing. "She helps out a little. But it's like having a very slow roommate." I didn't move. I waited until she passed me before I let myself breathe. I looked down at the towels, folded in neat thirds, just the way my mother taught me, and thought, this is how you disappear. Not all at once, but towel by towel, room by room. One Saturday they had guests over, friends from Carrie's book club. I made lemonade as I always did. No one asked. No one thanked me. I sat quietly on the side porch with my glass, listening to the laughter float out from the living room. When I stood to head back in, I caught a sliver of conversation. "She just sort of hangs around," one of them said. A pause. Then a whisper, low and sharp. "Do you think they'll ever move her into a home?" The words clung to the screen door like frost. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the hallway in thick socks, floorboards groaning beneath me. I stood outside my own bedroom door, the one they now called Nana's room, and felt like a guest again. A tolerated visitor in the life I once made. It wasn't one moment that undid me. It was many, soft, quiet and unnoticed. The kind that chip away at you like wind on stone. And yet, I still cooked. Still folded. Still gave. Because that's what love had always looked like to me. Service without condition. But lately, it was starting to feel like surrender. There's a moment sometimes when your heart breaks. Not loudly, not like shattered glass, but like a page turning in a book you didn't write. For me it was a Tuesday. The week after the tree went up. Carrie was hosting her parents for dinner. She asked me if I could just warm a few things while she picked them up from the airport. I nodded. Of course I nodded. That's what I always did. I made sure the green beans were crisp, not soggy. I laid out the nice plates, not paper this time. I even lit a candle, one of the ones Carrie kept in a drawer and forgot. I stood by the stove when they arrived. Heard the coat closet door. Heard the greetings. Heard laughter. I waited for someone to say hello. They didn't. So I kept stirring. The table was loud with conversation that I was never invited into. Her parents smiled politely when I set the bowl down. as if I were a helper from somewhere outside the story. And then Carrie, with the ease of someone who doesn't think twice, said, "Mom says you're such a blessing, helping us out like this. We're lucky to have a built-in housekeeper." A few chuckled. I didn't. I stood there, the serving spoon still in my hand, my fingers stiff and cold. Built-in housekeeper. Not mother. Not grandmother. Not guest. Just something convenient. That night, after the dishes were washed and the laughter had long moved to the back bedrooms, I sat at the kitchen table. Alone. The light above buzzed faintly, that old flicker that made me dizzy if I stared too long. I took out a piece of notebook paper, just to feel like I still had something of my own. And I wrote in shaky, neat cursive, "You don't see me. You use me. You think love is labor. You think I don't know." Then I folded it up and slid it into my apron pocket. Not to give to anyone. Just to prove to myself that I still had a voice. Later that week, I overheard something again. I wish I hadn't. Thomas was on the phone. His voice was tired, annoyed. "Yeah, she's still here." "No, she hasn't said anything. But we've got to figure something out soon. Carrie's losing patience. It's like she's just here. All the time." I stood by the hallway, hand on the railing, knees trembling. Just here. After all I gave, years of birthday cakes, scraped knees, prayers whispered over sleeping heads, I was now just here. I walked back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and I felt it, like something quietly snapping inside my chest. Not anger. Not yet. Just a deep hollow ache. Like my heart had been scooped out and replaced with silence. I looked around that small room, the guest room they gave me, not my own, and saw how little of me remained. A few sweaters. A framed photo of Harold, still smiling like he knew better. My slippers, worn at the heel. That was all. Everything else, my memories, my name, my voice, had been tucked away, one forgotten holiday at a time. And the worst part? I had let them. Because I believed that if I kept giving, they would eventually remember who I was. But all they saw was a woman too quiet to be noticed. That night I didn't cry. Not really. I sat still, hands folded in my lap, listening to the hum of the furnace and the muffled TV in the next room. And I whispered something I hadn't said in years. God, if I still matter, show me how to find myself again. Because I knew then, truly knew, that I couldn't go on like this. Not in this house. Not invisible. Not anymore. The next morning, the sun came through the blinds in a soft, reluctant way. December light, pale and tired, like it had run out of reasons to shine. I sat up slowly, every joint reminding me that I wasn't young anymore. But that morning, I didn't put on my apron. I didn't make coffee. I didn't sweep the kitchen floor, or fold the blankets left on the living room couch. I sat by the window instead. Just sat. Watched the wind rustle the leafless branches. Watched a squirrel dart across the railing and disappear into the cold. For once, I let the stillness stretch. Let the silence answer the silence. That's when I remembered the drawer. Bottom of my old hope chest, wrapped in a scarf, tucked away like a memory too sacred for daily light. The deed to the house. My house. The one Thomas and I had moved into when he was 8, after Harold and I scraped every dollar from savings. The one I painted myself, room by room, with chipped nails and a bucket of determination. After Harold died, I never changed the name on the title. It stayed as it was, Harold and Elaine Porter, joint tenants. Even when I moved into Thomas's home, no, my home they were living in, I never thought to change it. Maybe it was laziness. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was the part of me that never imagined I'd need to. But now, I saw it differently. It wasn't laziness. It was trust. And trust, I'd learned, can be misplaced, especially when wrapped in love. I pulled the envelope out, hands shaking slightly, and laid it flat on the bed. The paper had yellowed just a little around the edges, but the words were clear. My name. My claim. My proof. And with it came something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Power. Not loud. Not angry. Just quiet, rooted power. Like a tree that stood through every season and is still standing. I tucked the deed into my purse and got dressed. A soft sweater, one Harold had liked, and my walking shoes. No apron. No errands for anyone else. That afternoon, I took the bus downtown. A bumpy ride filled with schoolchildren and tired workers. I got off 2 stops early just to feel the winter air on my face. It stung a little, but it reminded me I was still here. At the county office, the clerk asked what I needed. Just updating a few things, I said. I signed a change of address. Confirmed ownership. Picked up a duplicate title. The young woman at the desk smiled when she handed me the forms. "Do you need help reading this?" she asked gently. I smiled back even gentler. "No, dear. I've been reading fine for 78 years. On the way home, I passed by the senior center. There was a small flyer in the window. Affordable housing for independent seniors. Now accepting applications. I walked in. Just to ask. Just to see. The woman behind the desk, Joyce, reminded me of a rose bush. All softness on the outside but strong where it counted. We talked. I told her I wasn't quite ready but maybe soon. She gave me a packet and her card anyway. "You'll know when it's time," she said. When I got back home, no, they're home. I went straight to my room and pulled out a small wooden box I hadn't opened in years. Inside were letters from Harold, old birthday cards, a brooch I wore on our 25th anniversary. I added the deed to the box. Then I sat, hands folded in my lap, and breathed. I didn't feel sad. I felt sure. That night I didn't eat dinner with them. Said I wasn't hungry. They barely noticed. The next morning, I began sorting. Not packing, not yet, just sorting. What I'd take. What I'd leave. What I'd finally allow myself to let go of. Each item I held felt like a decision. My recipe book. Coming with me. The apron. I folded it, kissed it, and placed it at the bottom of the donation bag. Harold's shaving kit. I held it to my chest for a minute. Then I placed it in the box marked keep. I moved slowly, but with purpose. I was no longer waiting to be seen. I was beginning to see myself. I didn't speak of my plans to anyone. Not yet. Some things grow better in silence. Roots stretching deep where no one can see. It started small. I moved my checkbook back into my purse. I'd let Carrie keep it in the kitchen drawer for convenience, but it never felt right, handing over my pen like that. I began checking my own balances again, called Social Security and confirmed my deposits. They still came in my name, and now, they'd be mailed to my new address. I hadn't told them yet what the new address would be. Not because I wanted to be sneaky, because I needed to be certain. At church that Sunday, I sat alone in the back pew, not out of sadness but for the view. I watched the families, the clasped hands, the bowed heads. I whispered my prayers without sound, letting the words rise inside me like steam from a warm cup. After the final hymn, I waited outside near the coat rack. That's where I saw her, Joyce, from the senior center. She had a gentle way about her, like someone who'd seen every kind of weather, and still chose to keep blooming. We sat on a bench just outside, the cold not too biting yet. "I think I'm ready," I said softly. She didn't ask for details. Just nodded and said, "Let's start with the paperwork." That week, I met her after lunch twice. She showed me floor plans. A studio with a kitchenette, one window facing a garden. Nothing fancy, but it was clean, warm, and mine. The wait list was short. I could move in by January if I wished. I did wish. But I also needed to make arrangements. I visited the bank, updated my accounts, transferred a small amount into a private savings I hadn't touched since Harold passed. I went to the post office and requested a forwarding address. The woman behind the counter asked if I was moving. "Just adjusting," I said with a smile. I spoke with a lawyer too, a quiet, kind man named Mr. Lambert who'd helped us close on the house decades ago. He was surprised to hear from me but remembered Harold. "I just need to update the deed," I told him, "and make sure no one else can touch it." He looked over the paperwork, then up at me. "You still own it fully. It's in your name alone." I nodded. "Good. Then I'll decide what happens to it." I asked him to prepare a simple letter. Nothing angry, nothing aggressive. Just a clear statement. One that said, "This is my home. You were guests. And now your welcome is ending." It would be delivered at the right time. Back at the house, things carried on. Carrie complained about the heater again. Thomas asked if I'd seen the electricity bill. I simply shook my head and said I hadn't checked. Because it wasn't their heater. And it wasn't their bill. They just didn't know that yet. I stopped washing dishes that weren't mine. I stopped folding towels I hadn't used. I made my own breakfast, oatmeal with honey, toast with real butter. One morning, Thomas asked if I'd do the grocery list. I'm not sure what you need, I said kindly. He blinked. You always do the list. I smiled. Not anymore. That afternoon while they were out, I walked from room to room. Not to clean or fix, but to say goodbye. The living room where Harold read the paper. The kitchen where I once danced with flour on my nose. The hallway where Thomas scraped his knee and I kissed it better. Each place had been mine once. Each place held stories. But not anymore. Now I carried those stories inside me. That was enough. In the quiet of my bedroom, I packed a single box with the essentials. The wooden box with Harold's letters. A quilt I made the year after he passed, soft blues and faded yellows. My Bible, with the corners turned down on every page that ever gave me comfort. And the letter Mr. Lambert had written. I sealed the box and slid it under my bed. Not yet. But soon. Because I was almost ready. Almost. I don't know what brought it back exactly. Maybe it was the way the winter light touched the picture frame near my bed. Or maybe it was the sound of wind rolling down the chimney. But that week, as I folded my clothes into soft piles, I remembered a different winter. One that carved its own kind of silence into me. It was the winter Harold got sick. He'd always been strong. Not tall or loud, but steady, the kind of man who didn't complain even when the pain had already taken root. By the time we got the diagnosis, it was already in his bones. They used big words at the hospital, but I only heard the one thing that mattered. There's no cure. He came home with a walker. I turned the dining room into a bedroom, so he wouldn't have to climb stairs. I washed him, fed him, rubbed his legs when they ached at night. I called the nurse every time something didn't feel right. And Thomas? He came by once, brought soup and a box of crossword puzzles. Told his father he was praying for him. He had a new job then. Busy. Always busy. I'll come next week, Mom, he said over the phone. Tell Dad I love him. He didn't come the next week. Or the one after. There were excuses. The kids had the flu, or the car needed a new part, or Carrie had an event. And I made peace with it. Told myself that's what life was like for the young. Busy. Unaware of how time disappears. But Harold noticed. Late at night, when the oxygen machine hissed beside him and I curled up on the floor nearby, he'd whisper, "Think he's scared?" And I'd nod, though he couldn't see me. Probably, I'd whisper back, "Tell him. I'm proud." I did. I wrote it in a letter and left it on Thomas's porch. He never mentioned it. Maybe he never opened it. One evening, it snowed heavy. Thick flakes like feathers. The nurse had gone home, and Harold's breathing slowed more than I liked. I panicked, wrapped him in a blanket, and drove him to the ER myself. I sat in the parking lot, frozen hands gripping the wheel, watching the snow blur the world. I had no one to call. No one I could ask to sit with me. I remember thinking, this is what it feels like to carry everything alone. He came home the next morning. We made it through that scare, but the winter didn't let go easily. And neither did the silence that followed. After Harold passed, Thomas said all the right things at the funeral. He stood beside me, hand on my shoulder. Dad was a great man, he said to the crowd. He taught me everything. But I stood there, remembering all the days he didn't come. All the dinners Harold ate alone, asking softly, "Do you think he'll visit soon?" I never confronted him. Never raised my voice. Because I was still hoping. Still believing that love, once planted, would bloom if I just watered it enough. But now that I was older, now that I'd felt this new silence inside his home, I saw it clearer. That wasn't the first time he left me to carry the weight. It wasn't the first time I'd been invisible in the center of my own storm. And this time, I wouldn't let the snow bury me. That memory, that winter, became a kind of mirror. A reminder. I'd done hard things before. I'd walked hospital hallways alone, held the hand of a dying man, and whispered strength into his last breath. I'd faced grief without losing my kindness. And now I could face this. Not with fury, Not with blame, but with the same quiet resolve that got me through that cold winter night. It was just after Christmas when I found it. The house was quiet. Carrie had taken the children to visit her sister, and Thomas had stepped out for groceries, or so he said. I'd stayed behind, saying I had a headache. In truth, I needed silence. The kind that doesn't press in around you like loneliness but opens up, like breath. I was putting away towels in the kitchen drawer. The one Carrie had claimed as her command center. Receipts, takeout menus, shopping lists, and something else. A thick blue folder. Unlabeled, but heavy with the kind of weight you don't feel with paper alone. I didn't mean to pry. At least that's what I told myself as I opened it. But maybe I did mean to. Maybe I was ready to know something I'd been suspecting in my bones. Inside were documents. Neatly printed spreadsheets. A real estate agent's business card. Notes scribbled in Thomas's handwriting. Refinance before April. Ask about comps. Title still shows her. Need update ASAP. My hands went cold. There was a printed email thread between Thomas and a realtor named Jeff. The words were clear, undeniable. Once her name is off, we can proceed with listing in spring. Assuming timeline stays the same, sale could close by May. My name. Off. No conversations. No questions. No. Mom, what do you want? Just plans. To erase. To move on. I sat at the kitchen table with that folder in front of me. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, steady and indifferent. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had already imagined a future where I didn't exist. I ran my fingers over the top of the page, over the words that drew borders around my life like I was an obstacle to move past. Once her name is off. I thought back to all the nights I stayed up folding their laundry. The mornings I rose before them to make pancakes shaped like initials. The holidays I made sure felt like home. Was this how they thanked me? I stood slowly, knees aching, and returned the folder exactly where I found it. Closed the drawer gently. Too gently. The kind of gentle you use when something inside is broken, and you're not sure if you can put it back together. Back in my room, I pulled the deed from my wooden box. Unfolded it. Read it again. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I needed it to steady me. It was still mine. The house. Every wall. Every window. Every piece of floor they walked across. They were living inside my bones and planning to sell the marrow. That night I didn't speak. I moved through the evening like a ghost. Carrie came back with the kids, full of stories. Thomas joked about traffic. I smiled when required. Nodded. But I was no longer listening to what they said. I was hearing what they didn't say. I went to bed early. Not out of exhaustion, but to protect something inside me. A quiet place that had finally started to grow back. In the stillness of my room, I whispered to Harold's picture. They were going to take it from me. And for the first time in years, I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Because pain, the deep kind, doesn't always come with tears. Sometimes it arrives like cold air in your lungs. Shocking. Icy. Awake. I lay in the dark with my hands folded on my chest, and made a promise to myself. They may have forgotten what I gave, but I will not let them take what's mine. Not now. Not quietly. And never again. The next morning, I didn't lace up my shoes. I didn't start the coffee pot, or ask if anyone wanted eggs. I sat at the edge of my bed, hands resting in my lap, and let the silence stretch. It wasn't empty anymore, it was mine. I'd always thought strength looked like big decisions. Bold words. Slammed doors. But I learned that real strength is quieter than that. It's in the things you no longer explain. The spaces you protect without asking permission. That day, I stopped asking. I didn't wait for Thomas or Carrie to hand me my place at the table. I quietly took myself out of rooms where my presence felt optional. I cooked only for myself. Oatmeal with cinnamon and a pinch of salt, just how I liked it. I washed only my clothes. Folded only my sweaters. I didn't announce it. There were no speeches. No bitter glances. Just absence. Just the kind of silence that makes people uncomfortable when they begin to notice it. It took 2 days before anyone asked where the folded towels had gone. I heard Carrie mutter, "I thought Mom folded them," and Thomas grumbled, "She probably forgot." They didn't ask me directly. and I didn't offer. By the third day, I began quietly packing a second box, not with essentials, but with the things I wanted to carry into my next life. A ceramic bird I'd painted in 1986. A framed picture of me and Harold at our anniversary picnic, our hands clasped tight, faces sunburned with laughter. I didn't touch the ornaments. I'd already said goodbye to those. I gave myself rules. No bitterness, no lingering, no second-guessing. On Sunday, I skipped church and went instead to the community garden by the senior apartments. I stood at the gate and watched two older women prune herbs together. They laughed at something, heads tipped back free. Joyce found me there, coat buttoned up to her neck, cheeks flushed from walking. "You ready?" she asked gently. "Almost," I whispered, just getting used to the idea of air that's only mine to breathe. She didn't rush me. That's the gift of someone who understands time. That afternoon, I wrote a letter, not the legal one. Just something for myself. A letting go. Dear Thomas, I was never just passing through. I built the walls you now lean against. I fed the hands that now point away from me. I gave you roots, and though you chose not to water mine, I am still growing. I am not angry, but I am done being small in spaces I once filled with light. I folded it and placed it inside my Bible. For memory. For grace. The days passed gently. I continued to detach, not as an act of revenge, but as an act of clarity. I belonged to myself again. The final thing I removed was the key copy they kept in the drawer. It had my name on the tag. Elaine Spare. I took it back quietly and slid it onto my own keyring. Because I wasn't a spare. I wasn't a backup plan. I wasn't something you returned to when it was convenient. I was Elaine. And I had a home. And I was leaving. I had always believed I could do it all alone. That if I just stayed quiet and kind, things would settle on their own. But life has a way of nudging us toward people who hold mirrors, not to scold us, but to help us see what we've forgotten. For me, that person was Joyce. She called the morning after the frost set in, when the windows wore a thin shimmer of ice and the world looked like it had been dipped in powdered sugar. I hadn't told her everything. But I think she knew. There's a knowing that lives between women who have been invisible too long. "Come by," she said simply. So I did. Her apartment smelled like oranges and eucalyptus. A candle flickered on her windowsill, and in the corner, a puzzle was halfway finished. Her hands, though slightly curled with arthritis, moved with the grace of someone who'd stopped hurrying a long time ago. We sat at her little kitchen table, two chipped mugs between us. Mine was navy, hers a soft green. Steam rose gently between us like breath shared in confidence. "I think I'm leaving," I said finally. She didn't blink. Just sipped. "I've spent so long trying to prove I was useful," I continued. "Like if I did enough, folded enough, cooked enough, they'd remember I was still someone." Joyce reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm. "Real. You don't have to be useful to be worthy," she said. "You just have to be." The tears came easy then. Quiet, warm, not painful, just cleansing. Like water finally finding the cracks and softening the soil beneath. I kept telling myself I wasn't being mistreated, just overlooked. But it feels like the same thing now. "It is," she said gently. "But the good news is overlooked things have room to grow. No one's watching to prune them." We sat like that for a while. Just breathing. No one asking for tea. No one needing help with homework. No one looking past me. Just me being. Before I left, she handed me a folder. Inside was the lease agreement. A map of the apartment complex. And a little keychain, plastic, pink, shaped like a tulip. I stared at it. "What's this?" "Your front door," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. My hands trembled slightly as I held it. Because it was real now. A home. My own. That evening, I took my time walking home. I passed the bakery with the red awning, still fogging up its windows from warm bread. I paused at the mailbox and let the cold bite my cheeks. It reminded me I was still here. Back in my room, I laid the tulip keychain beside my pillow and whispered, "Thank you." Though I didn't know who I was saying it to. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I did something simple. I put on lipstick. Not for anyone else. Not to serve or to be seen. Just for me. A shade called Rose of Sharon. The one Harold used to say made me look like spring. Then I slipped the tulip key into my pocket. I still hadn't told them. But I would. And soon. And when I did, I wouldn't whisper. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed to shrink. Have you ever found strength in moments of silence? Let me know. The letter went out on a Monday. It was folded neatly into a cream-colored envelope, the kind you use when you want something to feel formal but not cruel. I left it on the kitchen counter, tucked between a stack of coupons and the electric bill, right where I knew Thomas would find it when he came home from work. I didn't wait around. I took my purse, my gloves, and walked to the community library. Spent the afternoon thumbing through books I'd already read, letting my eyes skim the same pages, letting time pass like clouds across an afternoon sky. When I returned, the letter was gone. No one said anything at first. Carrie moved through the kitchen like she was trying not to stir the air. Thomas sat on the couch, staring too long at the blank television screen, remote untouched. I took a seat in the far armchair, opened my crossword, and filled in the word liberate. 5 across. At dinner, the silence held a sharpness I hadn't felt before. Not the quiet of indifference, but of people trying to read each other's faces. Carrie passed me the bread with 2 hands, eyes a little too careful. Thomas cleared his throat twice before speaking. Mom, he began, but the rest of his words tangled in hesitation. I looked up, not cold, just calm. Yes. He blinked. Swallowed. I got your letter. I nodded. I figured you did. A pause. Not long. Just enough. I didn't realize, he tried again. I know, I said softly. That's why I wrote it. Another pause. This one longer. Carrie stared down at her plate like it had answers printed between the carrots. I didn't elaborate. I didn't explain myself. I'd already done that for years, bent myself into softness, into helpfulness, into invisibility. That part was over. Over the next week, small shifts began. Carrie cleaned the counters without sighing. The kids tiptoed more. Thomas lingered before leaving for work, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the edges of the words. And I just kept preparing. I boxed up my books, my quilt, my photographs. I scheduled the moving van for the following Monday, not out of haste but clarity. The Sunday before, I caught Thomas standing in the doorway of my room. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time in years. You really leaving? He asked quietly. I turned to face him. Yes. But this is your home. No. I corrected gently. It was. For a time. But now it's just a place you live. He didn't argue. He looked down at his feet, then away, then nodded once. The kind of nod a man gives when he knows he's run out of excuses. I didn't mean to hurt you. I know, I said. But you did anyway. There was no anger in my voice. Only truth. And it hung between us heavier than shouting ever could. That night, he stayed up later than usual. I heard him pacing the hallway, stopping by my door, then moving on. Carrie cried in the guest bathroom. I could hear her through the thin wall, muffling her sobs into a hand towel. But I didn't go to her. Not out of spite. But because some lessons have to arrive without comfort. They were finally beginning to feel what I'd carried all this time. Not vengeance. Not punishment. Just consequence. I didn't want them to hurt. I just wanted them to understand that I had. And now, I was done carrying what wasn't mine. The moving van came just after sunrise. A quiet, boxy thing that rumbled down the street like it didn't want to wake the neighbors. Joyce was already there, wearing a knitted cap and holding a thermos of tea. I opened the front door and let the morning air in. It was crisp, still, and clear. The kind of air that lets you know the sky has been watching everything and kept it all written down. I carried out my own box. Not heavy, but meaningful. The quilt. Harold's letters. My photo albums. That was all I truly needed. Thomas came downstairs, hair still uncombed, rubbing sleep from his eyes like a boy who had dreamed too long and woke up too late. He stopped at the bottom step, watching as I handed the box to the driver. You're really doing this, he said. I turned to him, quiet, calm. Yes. I told you I would. He shifted. But what about the house? I mean, it's In my name. I finished for him. Yes. And I intend to keep it that way. His mouth opened then closed. Carrie hovered by the kitchen, arms folded. Not hostile. Not anymore, just unsure. Like someone who'd misread the entire script and didn't know how to recover her place in the scene. I walked back inside, hands tucked calmly into the pockets of my coat. You said once this was your home too, I said. And I suppose for a while I let that be true. But the truth is, I welcomed you in. That's not the same as handing it over. Thomas looked down. I stepped closer, but not close enough to invite softness. Not yet. I'm not angry, I said gently. I want you to hear that. I'm not doing this to punish you. Then why? He asked, voice catching. Because I remember who I am now, I said. And I deserve to live somewhere that remembers me too. Carrie spoke then, her voice small. So what happens now? I looked at her. At the woman who once asked for my pie recipes, who once left thank you notes on folded laundry. I don't know, I said. Maybe you'll find another place. Maybe you'll stay here for a little while. But you won't be living in the shadow of someone you've forgotten. Thomas's eyes brimmed. Not tears of protest, just recognition. I placed a copy of the updated deed on the counter beside the salt shaker. I've spoken with the lawyer, I added softly. The house is not for sale. And it's no longer shared. No yelling. No final blow. Just truth. Clean and simple as linen hung to dry. I turned toward the door then paused. My hand resting gently on the doorknob. You called me a waitress once, I said. That day at dinner. He winced. I know you didn't mean it to wound. But it did. Because I realized in that moment that you no longer saw me. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. Not to silence him, but to finish the thought before it unraveled. I have served this family. Loved it. Nurtured it. But I am not a fixture. I am not a background hum. I am a woman. A mother. And I will no longer live in places where I am treated like less. Then I opened the door. Outside, the sky was wide and generous. The van was almost full. Joyce waved. Thomas stepped forward, then stopped. Can we come visit? I paused. Someday, I said. When you come not out of guilt, but out of memory. And then I left. Not with fury. Not with grief. But with dignity trailing behind me like the hem of a well-worn coat. My new apartment sat on the second floor, overlooking a patch of garden that would bloom in spring. It was small, just one bedroom, a little living room, a kitchenette with space for a table and 2 chairs. But it was mine. The first night there, I lit a candle. Not for any reason other than to feel the warmth of something chosen. I set out my quilt on the bed, tucked Harold's letters into the nightstand, and placed our anniversary photo on the windowsill where the sun would touch it every morning. The silence in this place was different. It didn't echo or accuse. It didn't stretch heavy over meals, or follow me like a shadow. Here, silence was soft. A companion. A breath. I slept deeply that night. No creaking hallways, no muffled footsteps, no tension waiting behind a closed door. Just the hush of a life finally unburdened. Each morning after that, I rose without urgency. I made coffee just for me, 2 sugars, a splash of cream. I sat at the little table by the window and watched the world wake. Cardinals fluttered to the feeder. Squirrels danced across the railing. Joyce would sometimes wave from the sidewalk, always bundled in her bright scarf like a lighthouse in motion. Some afternoons, I joined the other women in the community room. We swapped recipes, traded stories, worked puzzles with our tired hands. No one asked me to prove my usefulness. They just made room for my presence. I began painting again, small things at first. Tulips. A robin's nest. Then one day, I painted a scene from memory. My old kitchen, the one before it stopped being mine. But this time I placed myself in it. Fully. Whole. And I framed it. Not to forget, but to remember rightly. Not just what was lost, but what I reclaimed. Joyce and I often sat by the garden benches. She told me about her husband, her children. The way grief had softened her but never stolen her. We spoke not as people looking back in sorrow, but as women who had learned how to carry forward. Letters came eventually. From Thomas. Stiff at first, like his words didn't know how to kneel. He didn't ask for forgiveness, only offered pieces of memory. I remember the lemon cookies. One line read, "You used to cut them into hearts." Another said, "I didn't know how much space you filled until you left it." I didn't write back. Not yet. Not because I held anger, but because I was still learning to live without apology. The house, my house, remained as it was. Quiet. Settled. I hired someone to check on it, to tend the yard, to fix the gutter Thomas never got around to. I kept it because it held stories. And maybe someday I'd pass it on, not as a gift to be taken for granted, but as a legacy to be honored. One morning, as the snow began to melt and the garden promised new color, I stood on my tiny balcony, tulip keychain in my hand, and I smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I was no longer waiting to be seen. I saw myself. And that was enough. Sometimes I sit by the window and think about that Thanksgiving. The stained napkin in my lap. The sound of my son's voice so casual, so thoughtless. Like a waitress. And I wonder if he remembers it. Not just what he said but how it made me disappear. But here's the truth I've come to hold. I didn't vanish that day. I started returning to myself. Not in anger. Not in noise. But in silence and steps. Small, sure, steady steps toward something I thought I'd lost. My own dignity. I used to think strength came in fire. In resistance. In loud refusal. But now I know. Strength sometimes comes in folding a sweater the way you like it. In making one perfect cup of coffee. In walking away without slamming the door. It comes in the whisper, no more. I don't need them to apologize, though maybe one day they will. I don't need them to say my name with reverence, or send flowers, or tell their friends they were wrong. I just need this peace. This stillness. This quiet, brave freedom. I earned it. With every overlooked kindness. With every silent heartbreak. With every meal made and word swallowed. So if you've ever sat at a table where no one passed you the salt. If you've ever folded yourself smaller to make others more comfortable. If you've ever been called something that made you feel less than who you are. I want you to hear me now. You are not invisible. You are not just helpful. You are not what they forgot. You are still here. Still worthy. Still glowing, even in the dimmest room. And if the time ever comes for you to stand, do it quietly. Do it kindly. But do it. Because you deserve to be seen. Even if you have to serve them the truth on the very plate they handed you. If you've ever felt forgotten or unseen, you're not alone. Share your story in the comments.